Hello all and welcome to Shatter Our Souls with Novaria and welcome back to another Metroid Monday. Now, today I want to take a bit more of a specific look at the Lamorn as a species, their world, their history, etc. And along with this, we're also going to be making our first visit into Volt Forge, hopefully finishing the first two or so towers within Volt Forge. Now, in general, I want to kind of get a vibe for how the Lamorn existed beforehand. And I think the easiest way to start this is through examining each of the 6 regions. If you have not played the game before, there will be spoilers in how they approach their lore and the later regions of the game. So, the first region we visit is indicative of the earliest age of the Lamorn. Think of it as the age of priests, a age of religion, an age of history. And so the Lamorn born at the time where this was a central focus were either focused in on the psychic capabilities or their history and the cultivation of the great tree in Fury Green. This led to a number of things, including but not limited to a deeper understanding and appreciation for the need for nature as well as the planet surrounding them, in a way that is very reminiscent at times to the Chozo of Prime 1. The second region, if we are gonna kind of poke at that here, is Volt's Forge. Volt Forge is a hub of technology, a electricity fueled lightning fueled construction plant of sorts, creating automotive, including the Viola, or dare I say, the motorcycles, minor trucks, mining machines, and other equipment that will be brought up at a later moment. And Volt Forge is actually possibly one of the more unique regions in terms of how it functions, as it is an area that functions primarily around the manufacturing side. And this age of technology that bolstered the Lamorn's capabilities, but also paradoxically broke their connection to a more, I suppose, peaceful lifestyle that they had cultivated prior. I like this approach of it being the absolute opposite of Fury Green for the second region. Now, part of that, of what I'm seeing with that, is that Fury Green, for all it is lush jungle and beautiful vistas. Volt Forge is cramped. It's a realm of technology. It is intended, above all else, to be a hub or point in which, at least gameplay-wise, feels very different. I like that, because if you were to look back at the other Prime games, Prime 1 had you starting on the frigate Orpheon with this same kind of cramped, dark corridors you're getting here, and then went to the lighter, more open-ended, jovial type of experience that you would get later on in Talon Overworld, and then into a desert after that. Prime 2, which I personally believe has the weakest opening of the original trilogy, in terms of design, I want to poke at for a moment in that Prime 2's design philosophy, while it definitely worked, was very samey. The temple grounds and the Agon Wastes were basically just chasms in between different sections of stone, or chasms or cracks in the rock. desert regions devoid of energy and resources. And this is something that really comes in and comes out a lot more frequently when you start talking about diversity in world building. Voltforge is the diversity side. And if I'm being honest, I really like Voltforge's approach to it. But Voltforge as a whole was being focused in on manufacturing and technology both breaks the flow of the game to this point and breaks the flow of the Lamorn's history. After Voltforge, I suppose the next best place to look at would be the Great Desert. Now, the Great Desert as a region is devoid of pretty much all lore, history, or anything. It is a wasteland. A wasteland which the Lamorn have actively stated in their data logs to be a huge problem that they had to attempt to solve. The creation of the Great Desert was the direct result of their age of technology, their age of machines, where they effectively stripped the entire desert of any natural resources, forcing the version of it that you see in game. No water, no plant life, very, very little life in general, with the exclusion of a couple of bugs. It's more or less the antithesis of what you had come to in the opening sections of the game. What this section, I suppose, is trying to showcase is that the Lamorn were not always careful about how they got their resources, where they got them from, and were willing to go to any lengths for what would be best considered comfort. And that, in and of itself, is interesting. Other species that we have seen throughout, or heard of throughout the entirety of the series thus far, generally didn't have comfort on the back of their mind. Like, the Chozo had a level of what they considered to be a primitive lifestyle, only because that was easier on them. That was absolutely a comfort thing for them. But others, like the Luminoth, the Brionians, didn't really have comfort very high on their list. They more or less had a love of their planet or a general expectation that they wanted to protect what they had. And so for them, it became more of a warring states, more of a danger-driven, more focused look at how the world existed. The Lamorn acknowledged outright that Vuros, for all the good it does, is a very harsh planet. And from what little we do see of it, as I do believe that we see a very small portion of this planet, for what we do see of it, the Lamorn are very accurate in their description, their belief. This is an incredibly dangerous planet. One that is torn by massive storms, including what seems to be a perpetual lightning storm. It's plagued by drought, by ice, by cold. And so Vuros is not necessarily the safest planet out there to begin with. Habitable, but not readily so. And so the desert as a whole kind of showcases that. Showcases a little bit more of what made the Lamorn unique, in that they were hardy enough to exist within this realm, within this planet, without going too far one direction or the other. Their next age is indicative of the Great Mines. Now, the Great Mines is the last region that you unlock in the game. And to be clear, I don't really like the Great Mines in terms of its design. It's just a giant hole. But in terms of what it actually showcases, in terms of the history of these individuals, it actually does a lot. Starting first and foremost, we have the crystals. Now, Samus has one embedded in her forehead, a crystal that unlocks latent psychic capabilities, something that the Lamorn were very well known for. Now, earlier, I had mentioned that in Metroid Prime 4's first area, the Fury Green region, that there were priests and clergy and individuals in religious roles that had psychic capabilities. This crystal that was mined from the center, from the deepest, darkest, nastiest depths of Vuros, unlocked that latent potential in the every Lamorn. If anything, this is an age of prosperity for them. If everybody can access psychic capabilities and whatnot, then theoretically any singular Lamorn could be anything. And I do love that. I love this idea where they are more community focused, a age of equality. I love it. I think that that is one of, if not the best things that they could have done. But all good things also come to a grinding halt. Now, the mines themselves were likely stripped bare of ore in a effort to try to maintain the amount of technology that they have. The technology that is showcased within the manufacturing facility that is Voltforge is impressive, to say the least. To get even a fraction of the metal that would be required for a undertaking of this magnitude is astronomical. And so I can say with relative certainty that whatever happened to create this place likely ended up breaking down a lot of material. They, for lack of better terms, destroyed Vuros for technology. And so they realized that while Vuros was an incredibly harsh, incredibly dangerous location, dangerous planet to live on, they weren't doing it any favors. And so their next major option, their next choice, their next step in their evolution was to use that same manufacturing, use that same technology, pool their resources, their minds together to try to develop means of refixing or rebuilding this desert from the ground up. Now, on a basic statement, I don't have any issues with them doing this. I think that they have every right to try to restore Vuros. And on its own, if that's where they stopped, I wouldn't have any issue with it. The problem that I run into with how they approach this concern is that the Lamorn went totally the other direction. Now, to explain what I'm getting at with this, I want to kind of turn our attention to real-world politics and events. And I'm not entirely sure on what timeline this was, but I believe that China had been developing a means of reclaiming desert land by planting incredibly hardy plants and whatnot to stabilize the soil. Effectively, by stabilizing the soil, they could make it so that it could be more nutrient dense once again. More nutrient dense soil meant that more plants could grow, more plants, more wildlife, etc. Now, this is an incredibly expensive, but also an incredibly time-consuming means of accomplishing this goal. And the Lamorn didn't necessarily have the... Time wasn't exactly on their side in this case. As was stated, they have already felt that Vuros was dangerous in multiple ways. So instead, they went searching, as one does, and they ended up in Flare Pool, a region known for magma or volcanic activity. And in Flare Pool, they noticed that in certain regions, the magma started turning green, not its characteristic red, orange, yellow mix. Instead, it was green, a very cold, a very life-giving color. It intrigued them, as it should. They managed to harness and refine some of this green energy, as they call it. In reality, it's probably a chemical of some variety that was leached from the mining. We don't necessarily know what this energy is, only that what it was capable of accomplishing is it actually was used in Fury Green. We can tell this partially because in the region just after you fight Carvex, there is a lot of greenery, there's a lot of life, and it is the only region in the 5 main zones of the game that has any green energy crystals anywhere within it. This suggests that that region was the testing grounds. And it is absolutely full of life, both flora and fauna. So I can understand why they came to the conclusion that they did. However, I'm pretty sure some of you have caught this already. There really wasn't much in terms of testing on this green energy. There was I suppose, a given idea, an understanding that whatever this green energy was, it created an explosion of life. And this explosion of life, while it was incredibly beneficial for the various biomes that it was in, wouldn't it be easier if we could just make it rain from the sky? And this is where, admittedly, I have a problem with how the Lamorn handled things. So they took this refined green energy, created a plant to harness it, refine it, and effectively get it ready for mass use. We are talking astronomical levels of green energy being funneled into machines for purification or what have you. And then they created a cannon. A cannon with enough force behind it that it could, and I'm going to quote this, take out the moon. The result of this monstrosity of a cannon was that it was intended to launch refined green energy into the stratosphere to rain down upon Vuros. The more green energy they could harness and rain down on the populace, the better off it would be. The theory was that effectively the showers of green energy would cultivate the land and bring greenery and life back to Vuros. I like this idea, but only in theory. The problem that we run into with it is that they didn't fully understand what it was that they were playing with, what they were tampering with. At this point in time, they were so full of themselves, so sure of themselves, that they didn't consider that there could be a negative consequence to begin with. And so, I personally believe that the outcome was not exactly desired, but definitely expected. The green energy showers that were sent across Vuros interacted very poorly with the crystals from the mine. These crystals, on their own, weren't detrimental in the grandest sense, but when combined with the green energy that was showered rain from the sky, it ended up causing a cataclysmic mutation within the Lamorn. This mutation, if ever there was one, had a few minor pieces that needed to be addressed. Among them is the fact that effectively the Lamorn had a difference between what would be Dr. Bruce Banner and the Hulk within the Marvel Universe. One is incredibly instinctual but incredibly strong. The other, incredibly scientific, incredibly thoughtful, but far more frail. And so the Lamorn, realizing that there was a mistake, and not really knowing where to go to fix it, ended up creating the Ice Belt, a hospital of sorts that acted both as a sanctuary against the grievers, but also as a, well, medical facility. The goal of the facility was to try and find a way to return the grievers, the mutated Lamorn, back to their original state. Their biology, their DNA, hadn't been altered very much, if at all. It was simply a gene that had been activated by this green energy. In the same way that, admittedly, Pokemon evolved. Certain stressors, certain factors come into effect and activate certain genes, changing the once peaceful Lamorn into a creature of destruction and mass power. So, the Grievers ended up being the biggest threat to the Lamorn. But they were so dead set on trying to find a way, a means, a something, to be able to gather themselves, get their thoughts together, and fix this mistake they made, that once again, they kind of just, they put all their eggs in one basket. Now, while I cannot say specifically, I do know that about 140-ish trials had gone through. And I could be wrong on the number, it has been a little while since I read that. But effectively, they had attempted to do multiple clinical trials to try to repair the damage that was done on a DNA, on a genetic level. And it went about how you'd expect for the most part. The refined green energy that they have been working with turned out to be a key of sorts to fixing their problems, fixing the mistake, the mess that they have made. And again, I don't have an issue with this. I think it's fine that they took the initiative and the time to talk about how their world changed, how their people evolved. But I again feel like they didn't fully know what they were doing. And I believe that using refined green energy would be the same as gamma radiation on the Hulk. It would just aggravate the issue. Now, I'm not a doctor, I don't know, but I would like to assume that that was not a proper use of it, and maybe somebody can tell me whether or not I am totally out to lunch here. But the refined green energy that they were using for their medical tests, to me, was just trying to use a miracle cure, snake oil type stuff. We do witness in some of their data logs that they were able to begin reversing that transformation. But what they were able to accomplish was questionable at best. So, I don't know. Maybe I'm looking too far into it. Maybe I'm not looking far enough. The last region is Chrono Tower. Now, Chrono Tower is a region that was likely built long before this Griever problem began. And I want to be very clear on my understanding of that. Chrono Tower is and will forever be their kind of... it's a safe haven of sorts. A central location where their greatest technologies were kept and maintained, including their version of interstellar travel. Now, unlike other races, other species within the galaxy, the known Metroid universe, the Lamorn did not use traditional rockets or shuttles to get from A to B. Instead, they focused in on technology that to us would be a dream. Short to long-ranged teleportation. Now, the teleportation side, the short-ranged, is used for transportation of larger objects from point A to point B. They really had that nailed. The long-range teleportation required the use of the Master Teleporter. The artifact, the thing that we are driven towards fixing and utilizing for ourselves before leaving Vuros. Again, not a huge issue. So, stepping back for a moment here. During some of my earlier Metroid Prime conversations, I had mentioned this moment. Now, I loved the trailers for Prime 4. And when I first saw this, I had been under the assumption that this was perhaps a fusion of the Lamorn technology along with potentially space pirate tech. It seemed too dark and damp and looked like it was space pirate in origin. This is the first view of the Viola suit. The Viola suit is a very sleek, very dark, very... what's the word? He's a very sleek, dark, slender, and aerodynamic design for Samus's suit. A design that works well with the core Viola. Now, personally, I would have liked to see it in red or perhaps orange, but I can settle for silver. Black would be nice too. The Viola is a unique piece of tech. It is the first time that I can think of off the top of my head right now that Samus has had a vehicle of any variety that you can use and pilot yourself during the game. Now, that's not to say like Prime 3's use of the ship is different. The Prime 3 ship is more or less a interactive cutscene, a loading zone, if you will. It's a menu system. It is not a fully pilotable, fully utilized piece of tech. You could argue that the cannons that you see in Prime 2 could be piloted by Samus, but in reality, I believe that it's closer to the fact that they just kind of exist, and Samus just happens to use them. The fact that this can be piloted, used, and transported across vast sections of desert makes the Viola probably the most unique upgrade in the entire game, excluding the charge beam variant of the control beam. Now, I'm going to be honest about this particular statement here. I believe that the Lamorn were incredibly smart. I had originally wanted to say that they lacked a lot of infrastructure, that what they had on hand just wasn't quite enough. And I was originally making this argument on the basis of we see no highways, we see no houses, we see no food storage. Everything we witness is either a religious realm, or for religious purposes, it is for mining and control. Oh joy, more Cybots. Or the regions we have are focused in on medicine, in which case large infrastructure isn't necessarily a huge effort, not necessarily a whole amount or a large amount of effort, is put towards that aspect. Now, the reason I want to bring this up is that in prior games, you do witness pieces of this. Within Prime 1's Talon 4, you did have infrastructure that did show up. Sparingly, of course. You had the elevators getting you from the lower portions of the Magmoor Caverns, along with technology used to monitor the active volcano. You had shipping containers, and you had smaller means of getting around. It was clear, at least in some capacity, that the Chozo were not sedentary to the point of only existing in one location. Chozo ruins are much a huge part of this. But what we lacked in the Chozo ruins and in its surrounding area was the food storage, specifically. Now, my theory on this goes that at some point or another they became vegetarian in nature or something of that nature, and the Talon overworld, which was a fairly verdant paradise, had the capability of sustaining life on a larger scale through just foraging. We didn't necessarily get huge sweeping highways or anything like that, but we did receive enough in terms of infrastructure to get an idea of how they might have gotten things from point A to point B. The third, we actually did get to witness at least the ruins of basic Chozo housing in the Phendrana Drifts. It wasn't huge, but it did exist. Now, the reason I want to bring this up is that throughout Prime 4, to my knowledge, there is no housing. Now, this could be that the Lamorn have been gone so long that there is no housing left. It was destroyed by the Grievers or something of that nature. I don't necessarily know. It could very well be that the Lamorn's original lodgings, their original homes, were underneath the desert itself. Now, this was brought to me by a individual that I've been kind of throwing some information at and asking questions with. May have come across them in the past, the Crazed Lagger. But the thing is with this is we don't have hard evidence. We do, however, have ruins. 6-ish small shrines of sort, religious temples that had access to the surface and the underground. Now, the reason I'm going to question this is that technically, under all honesty, the underground regions of Vuros are too small to house any notable population. But I don't know where they would be. And you can kind of point at other games, Prime 3, and say, oh, the Brionians didn't have houses, you're not worried about that. And reality is, I didn't think about it at the time. I was very invested in the music and trying to piece together the world. Metroid Prime 4, while it does have absolutely stellar sound design, absolutely phenomenal music, I found myself questioning more about the everyday lives of these guys. And I think part of it is that I'm trying to fill in the blanks where maybe there are none. Metroid Prime 4, for all of its greatness, for what it does right, it also does a lot that doesn't quite hit the mark. And so, me attempting to fill in the blanks in some capacity, look for evidence where there might not be, was at least in my mind, an attempt to try to justify some of these things. Metroid as a franchise, as a series, has always been very invested in letting the player get lost, letting the player piece together information through context, through the worlds. It didn't have to be told to you directly. And while, let's be clear, it's not Dark Souls level of obtuse, it does leave a lot of information to be discovered just on the basis of figuring out and looking through each data entry in a more direct or impactful manner. The reason I'm bringing this up, the reason I want that to be acknowledged, is that, to me, a lot of us are writing off Prime 4's world building a little bit too early. That smaller details may still be missed. And I'm not going to say it's going to be perfect. I doubt that there is going to be quite as much detail in the world building as there was in Prime 2. But I also don't believe it's as barren as most of the internet seems to think. Now, getting kind of back to the task at hand, holy smokes, it's been half an hour. Vault Forge. Vault Forge as a region is rather uniquely designed, and admittedly probably one of the better designed regions in Prime 4. Its entire design is a series of 3 towers. Tower 1 is focused primarily on manufacturing. Tower 2 is storage, and Tower 3 is more focused in on the... Well, how do I want to word this? Tower 3 is more about the licensing, the logistics. Now, ultimately, all 3 towers are incredibly necessary for the overall success of the manufacturing system that is Vault Forge. But as I had talked earlier about kind of how they did this, Vault Forge is actually probably the best designed futuristic factory in the entirety of the Metroid universe. And I'm fairly confident in that assessment, actually. So, let's take 2 moments here and step back from the obvious here. Metroid Prime 1, 2, and 3, each planet had some form of a power source. Something. Anything. Prime 1's power source was primarily based in sunlight. Was primarily based in sunlight, geothermal activity, using the resources of their planet to the absolute fullest, without destroying the planet as a whole. The energy source, the primary focused energy of the Luminoth, was by far and away sunlight energy. You can see this everywhere. It was not a secret that they wanted to use the light of Aether to their greatest effect it can. Not only was it planetary energy, but it provided a level of safety, a level of control over their environment that not many regions could. But Prime 3 is where energy got kind of wonky. Now, we witness 4 separate regions. Norion focused in on battery, on electricity, on mines and control through the similar means to what we as humans, Homo sapiens on Earth would. I don't mind that. I think that's okay. It's realistic nonetheless. The second region was Bryo. And Bryo focused in on fuel gel. effectively a semi-refined version of gasoline that was naturally occurring on Brio. Fuel gel did virtually everything. You needed something moved, fuel gel. You needed something destroyed, fuel gel. You needed something to run a propeller. Hey, there's an abundance of fuel gel. Brio was incredibly fuel rich. And so they didn't necessarily have a need for renewable resources when their core resource was as abundant as it was. The Chozo of Elysia, however, had another challenge to overcome. The Chozo of Elysia were trying to make sure that the space station of sorts, their watchtower, could see out into the stars. And, of course, needed this to be running long term. To my understanding, they did use light energy, they did use wind energy, they used virtually every energy source they had on Elysia to the greatest effect that they could, to generate electricity of some variety to keep the station powered. Again, not a bad thing. The Space Pirate homeworld focused in on phazon energy, a highly reactive mutagen as a basis of all of their electronics. And this worked. But the Lamorn? Oh no, we have a perpetual storm to harness. Their electrical system, by far and away the best I have seen in the franchise, is harnessing raw lightning. Pure power. 15 million gigajoules per second. This automatically lights up the entire tower. Gets everything moving, because once you have lightning that is in the tower, it starts contributing to a mass relay. One tower only needs one lightning relay to control it. It is incredibly potent. And I love that was their chosen resource. Because, let's be real, there are multiple games that do something of a similar nature. But each time you get into using certain types of energy, there is usually some form of negative drawback. Utilizing lightning means that you have to account for massive power surges, massive amounts of energy input all at once. And if your storm ain't where you need it to be, your manufacturing plant is as good as dead. And that's reasonable. That is a statement that could be made about their manufacturing plant in Voltforge. They need this perpetual storm to do the job. But the storm is just that, perpetual. It doesn't stop just because of anything, really. And so the Lamorn using it to the fullest effect that they can is, in my opinion, the greatest engineering marvel that they ever came across. The Viola, fantastic, but we made motorcycles that run on a different energy source. Oh, teleportation? Yeah, we'll figure that out in 10 years. Micro wormhole travel, something. But utilizing the natural ebb and flow of natural electricity in the air, electrons moving through currents on the wind, that is something that we as humans have not been able to harness in a meaningful capacity. And it's one that I see being incredibly useful, especially as weather gets more volatile. And so, I can't help but say, the Lamorn were doing something right. Anyways, the third tower, focusing in on the licensing and the testing of the various vehicles, I'm 50-50 on it. See, the Viola is a unique tool. One I think actually got underutilized within the entire game as a whole. See, the problem I run into, and may just be a me thing, but the Lamorn's whole technology explosion that they went through ended up creating a few major things, notably the Viola, their trucks, their mining gear, etc. I've mentioned that. But the mining gear and the Viola specifically, the amount of other options they had means that they didn't necessarily need to focus on creating all of these technologies separately. Like, the Viola had a lot going for it. It was fine. The trucks got things from point A to point B. The Viola got people from point A to point B. But how many Viola did they make? This manufacturing plant is mass producing the Viola. Like, absolutely endlessly. So, am I wrong for my assumption that they overdid it in their manufacturing? Maybe. I don't think so, but that is a possibility. What isn't a possibility is the possibility of battle. Now, we have, up to this point, run into Silex technically once in a cutscene. And Silex is a unique entity, and one that I wish I could love more. See, Silex was brought to us in the form of Metroid Prime Hunters for the Nintendo DS as an entity that was terrifying in nature. He was your equal. Not just another random hunter. 6 hunters on equal footing with Samus. Maybe not equal, but close. Effectively, were fighting for supremacy, believing that each of them were the chosen one, if you will. The one that would claim ultimate power. And while I liked this, some characters stuck out to me for different reasons. Spire stuck out to me for his drive to try to find his people. As the last of his species, it only made sense. Trace wanting to help the expansion of the Kraken Empire. Fantastic. No notes. These are entities that made sense. They have a goal, they have a drive, and here's what that means for them. Silex, however, was unique. He didn't necessarily have the most storied history. He was more elusive than the others, which made him a much more unique entity as far as how the game presented him. He wasn't intended to be, I think, overly in-depth, especially at the time that he was made. When he was first introduced to the franchise, Silex was just a character, a named character, one who could fight Samus, but just a character, a avatar. And I don't have an issue with him being an avatar. I don't have an issue with him being anything, really. What bugged me about how the character was portrayed is that we didn't have anything to go off of. And so the developers of Prime 4 have all the power in the world to create whatever they wanted. And Silex, we witness, at least in this case, he's a pretty potent fighter. Now, as far as it goes, Silex in this battle has like 4 main attacks. The green arrows that he launches towards you, the run and gun through flying, he has the spinning tornado thing, which admittedly at this moment I have no idea what that's about. But he had options. He had a lot going for him even right from the get-go in this battle. He has high-speed mobility on par with a speed booster, and he has other options available to him. but he also has a wealth of technology that could have served him better at earlier times. Now, to get this, I suppose I need to poke at the most under-liked game in the trilogy, or in the original trilogy, Prime 3. Now, Metroid is not exactly known for post-game. Generally speaking, each game focuses in on a core experience, exploration, and generally focuses in on fluidity, making sure that the game feels good. Now, this is the same design philosophy that they bring to Super Mario, where if it isn't fun to play as the character, then why would you play the game? Now, the case with Metroid is much the same. It started a little clunkier, let's be real, but they focused on core gameplay that made sense. Where was it going with this? Prime 3 has a situation where it was in an era where post-game, where games could finish, but you weren't done. Not necessarily, at least. Now, Prime 1 and 2 were in an era where there was technically post-game starting. You could go back and play parts of a game again. You could go find certain things. You could go item hunting or Skulltula hunting in Ocarina of Time or in the Majora's Mask. There was nothing stopping you from going all out on your collectathons. Metroid Prime and Metroid as a whole does focus a lot more heavily on these collectathons and the idea of you could collect anything and everything in the game. There's nothing stopping you. Huh. But Sylix had a unique opportunity in Prime 3. See, at the end of Prime 3, when Phase is destroyed, you have a moment where all the Phazon in the universe begins to pool and destroy itself. And Sylix, being an individual who uses Stolen Federation technology in order to do whatever Sylix decides to do that day, made him uniquely powerful and in a unique position of he could have stolen a PED suit or two and be used as a bonus endgame boss. I would have loved to see that. I think that there's a lot of missed opportunities when we start talking about Metroid Prime and the Metroid franchise as a whole. And so, in that regard, Sylix had a lot of potential here. But then again, we weren't fighting Sylix at all, so I guess that kind of makes sense. The other thing that I'm going to point out about this character that maybe I'm a little too persnickety about is that Sylix as a character has always been kind of there, kind of not. He's always existed within Metroid Prime's history, but he only really showed up cutscenes after, or in a couple of oddball cutscenes prior to 4. Technically outside of his original appearance. And so, for me, stating that, it feels like there was a lot of missed opportunities with getting him to where he could be. More Cybots. This one is, I believe, the Cavalier or something. Basically a shielded version of the Cybot, which focuses in on rushdown tactics. I suppose I haven't talked about the Cybots really at all. There are numerous varieties of the Cybots. Technology of the Lamorn that didn't necessarily seem like they fit when you were in Chrono Tower. They existed, they've always been there, but there wasn't really much of a point to them. Now, the Cybot's entire identity, their drive, their goal, was intended to be as a defense force against the Grievers. Believed to be a means of protecting the what remained of the Lamorn from the same thing that befell the rest of their brethren. I don't necessarily disagree with this, but I believe that they go about it in the wrong way. Once again, the Lamorn are great, but they do some silly things. Now, their idea of protection was actually kind of unique. Instead of focusing in on arming their citizens or a violent tendencies like you might see with the Luminoth, who opted to fight back mano a mano and created soldiers to fight against the Ing, the Cybots were the Lamorn's answer to the Grievers, a threat that they didn't necessarily have an easy answer to. I don't mind this solution. I think it makes a lot of sense, if a little bit off-putting at times. The entire point of the Cybots is we want to create a version of a soldier, a entity that is capable of fighting against the Grievers without sacrificing our own people. It is an evolution of sorts of the prior design and identity of other beings that we've seen in the galaxy. Or in the grander universe, I think is a better way of putting it. Instead of fighting ourselves, we'll get an automaton to do it. Now, this seems to be a more common ideology as games progress and get newer, but it is nonetheless something that does come up often. But mayhaps this is a discussion for another day. If you like what you see, I would love if you left a like, a subscribe, comment or two on the channel. Let me know what you think. Do you have any theories? I'd love to hear them. Until then, I hope you all have a fantastic one.